Hola a todos, my name is James and I'm an A-level Spanish student. Today I'm going to be filming a video talking all about the grammar that you need to know in order to pass your exams at GCSE. Vamos. Firstly, we're going to start off with subject pronouns. Now, subject pronouns are the small words in sentences like I, you, he, she, it, etc. So in Spanish, we have 6 key categories of subject pronouns shown in this table here. And we're going to go through and fill this in. So we have yo, which means I, tú, which means you, él, ella, which means he or she, nosotros, nosotras, which is we, vosotros, vosotras, which is you, and ellos, ellas, which is they. Now, something to note here is we have 2 forms of nosotros. We have nosotros and nosotras, and it's the same with vosotros. We have vosotros and vosotras. Nosotros and vosotros are the masculine forms, whereas nosotras and vosotras are the feminine forms. Another thing to point out is the difference between tú and vosotros. They both mean you, but are used in different contexts. Tú is singular and informal, whereas vosotros is plural and informal. Bueno, now that we've covered the key subject pronouns, let's move on to the first tense, the present tense. So the present tense is used when we're talking about actions that happen on a regular basis. They happen normally, they happen habitually. For example, every day I eat pizza. We know that the action happens every day. Bueno. Now in Spanish, to conjugate a verb, we have to take off the infinitive ending, that is AR, ER or IR, and then we add on the new ending depending on who is talking. Bueno. For AR verbs, we have o, as, a, amos, ais, an. For ER verbs, we have o, es, e, hemos, eis, en. And for IR verbs, we have o, es, e, imos, is, en. Now you can notice patterns between each set of endings. So we have all the O's, then we have as, es, es, a, e, amos, emos, imos, ais, eis, is, an, en. So although there are 3 different sets of endings, there are definitely similarities between them. Okay, now in the present tense we have a few irregular verbs to be aware of, and I'm going to write these in red. So, ser becomes soy, eres, es, somos, sois, son. Estar, meaning to be, becomes estoy, estás, está, estamos, estáis, están. Next we have ir, which means to go, and ir becomes voy, vas, va, vamos, vais, and van. Next we have tener, which means to have. Tener becomes tengo, tienes, tiene, tenemos, tenéis, and tienen. So that means I have, you have, he has, we have, you have, they have. And finally, we have the verb hacer, which means to do or to make. Now, hacer in the present tense becomes hago, haces, hace, hacemos, hacéis, and hacen. So there's a quick summary of the present tense. We've covered the irregular endings and some of the key irregulars in the present. Let's move on to our next tense, which is the preterite tense. So the preterite tense is one of the many past tenses in Spanish, and we use it when we're talking about actions that have a definite start and end point. They happened one time in the past. For example, last night I ate a pizza. We know when the action started, when it ended, and it's in a specific time frame. The process of conjugation is exactly the same as in the present tense. We take off the ending, AR, ER, or IR, and add on the new one depending on the subject of the sentence. Now, in the preterite tense, the ER and IR verbs share the set of endings. Vamos. So, for AR verbs, we have E with an accent, aste, O with an accent, amos, astes, and add-on. For ER and IR verbs, we have E, iste, io, imos, istes, ieron. And of course, we have a few irregulars to learn as well. So, just like in the present tense, ser and ir are irregular, but interestingly, in the preterite, they use the same conjugation. So, ser and ir become fui, fuiste, fue, fuimos, fuisteis, and fueron. Next, we have hacer. Now, hacer becomes hice, hiciste, hizo with a Z, hicimos, hicisteis, and hicieron. So if we were to translate these, we'd have I did, you did, he, she did, we did, you did, they did. Next we have tener. Tener in the preterite becomes tuve, tuviste, tuvo, tuvimos, tuvisteis, tuvieron. And the final verb that we have is poder. Poder is to be able to. And in the preterite, it becomes pude, pudiste, pudo, pudimos, pudisteis, and pudieron. And there we have it, a very brief summary of the preterite tense, going through our regular endings and also a few of the most important irregulars. Be aware that in Spanish there are more irregulars for all these tenses, but these are just the key ones for the purposes of the summary video. The next tense we're going to have a look at is the imperfect tense, and it's another past tense in Spanish, and this time it's used for actions that happened over a period of time, things that we used to do, or things that were happening. For example, I used to play football, or we were talking. Now for this tense, like the preterite, we have one set of endings for AR verbs, and then one set of endings for ER and IR verbs. And I'll highlight that just to make it very clear. So for AR verbs, we take off the ending and we add on aba, abas, aba, abamos, with an accent on the first A, abais, aban. Now for ER and IR verbs, remember, these are the same endings. We have ia, ias, ia, iamos, iais, ian. So these are all my endings for my regular verbs. For example, hablar would become hablaba, hablabas, hablaba, hablábamos, hablabais, hablaban, because it's an AR verb. Now, interestingly, in the imperfect, there are only 3 irregular verbs. So we have ser, ir, and ver. Ser becomes era, eras, era, éramos, erais, and eran. Ir becomes iba, ibas, iba, ibamos, ibais, and iban. And ver becomes veía, veías, veía, veíamos, veíais, and veían. So, just be careful because these are really common verbs and they are irregular, so make sure you learn them. So just to recap, the imperfect tense is used for talking about what used to happen or what was happening. So to translate, I used to be tall, I would say era alto. Bueno, let's move on now to the next tense. We're now going to be looking at a new time frame and a new tense, the near future tense. As the name suggests, the near future tense talks about near events in the future. And the way we form it, we take the present tense of ir, we add a, and we add an infinitive verb. Just remember that an infinitive is the part of the verb that ends in ar, er, or ir. That is the infinitive. Just to recap, for the present tense of ir, we have boy, vas, ba, vamos, vais, and ban. So, for example, if I wanted to say, I am going to play, I would say boy, because I'm taking the present tense of ir, plus a, and the infinitive to play is jugar. So I would say, voy a jugar, voy a jugar. And that is the near future. Events that are going to happen. We take the present tense of ir, plus a, plus the infinitive. Now, a more complex future tense that you can use is the proper future tense. Now, the way that we form this is we take the whole infinitive verb, so for example, hablar, bailar, and we add on the correct ending depending on the person in the sentence. Now, the good thing about the future tense is that all three types of verbs, AR, ER, and IR verbs, use the same set of endings. So you only have to learn one set of endings for all three. And just bear in mind that you add the ending on to the whole infinitive. You don't take the ending off. The endings for the future tense are as, a, hemos, eis, an. So for example, if I were going to say we will eat, I take the infinitive to eat, which is comer, and I add on the we ending, which is hemos, to get comeremos. If I wanted to say I will go, I take the infinitive to go, which is ir, and I add on the I ending, which is e accent, ire. So that's just a reminder of how to form the future tense. Now, in the future tense, some verbs are what we call stem changing. That is, we can't use the whole verb as our stem. For example, I can't say podere. I can't say tenere, hacere, or decire. We have to use a different stem. For poder, we use P-O-D-R. For tener, we use T-E-N-D-R. For hacer, H-A-R, and decir, D-I-R. So for example, I will be able to, I take my new stem and add on the ending, podré. For tener, I take my new stem, T-E-N-D-R, add on my ending, tendré. And that is the process that we will carry out for all of our stem changing verbs. Like I've been saying before, there are lots of stem changing verbs in Spanish, but these are the key ones to learn for your exam. Bueno, we're now going to move on to the conditional tense. And the reason we're doing conditional tense is because it's a very similar tense to the future, in that we add the whole ending to the infinitive. The conditional is used to talk about events that would, should, or could happen. They are hypothetical or have a remote possibility. And just like the future tense, there is only one set of endings for all three kinds of verb. So, those endings are ia, ias, ia, íamos, íais, and ían. So if I wanted to say we would eat, I take the whole verb to eat, comer, and I add on the we ending, which in this case is íamos. So my verb becomes comeríamos. If I wanted to say they would go, I take the whole infinitive to go, ir, and I add on the they ending, which in this case is ian. Irían. Comeríamos. We take the whole infinitive and add the ending. And that is how you form the future tense, the conditional tense. We're talking about events. And that is how you form the conditional tense, when we're talking about events that would, should, or could happen. Just remember that the stem changing verbs in the conditional are the same as the stem changing verbs in the future. So I couldn't say podería, I would have to say podría. Okay, moving on, we're going to start looking at the perfect tense. The perfect tense is what we sometimes call a compound tense because it's made up of two parts. We have to have the present tense of haber, which means to have, plus what we call the past participle, which is the ed part of the verb. The perfect tense is used if we're talking about what has happened. For example, I have done, we have played. In Spanish, the present tense of haber is he, has, ha, hemos, habéis, an. So that's my present tense of haber, and we choose the correct one based on the subject of the sentence. And then my past participle is very simple to form. We take off the ending and add on the new one. So for AR verbs, the new ending is ado, and then for ER and IR verbs, it's ido. So for example, cantar, to sing, would become cantado. So we take off the AR, and then we add on the ado or the ido. So if I wanted to say they have sung, I would take the they form of haber, which is an, and then add on the past participle, cantado. And cantado is they have sung. So the perfect tense is a really nice tense to put in your writing, as it's quite complex and it shows that you have a good command of Spanish. Very similar now is what we call the past perfect or the pluperfect. And it's very similar to the perfect tense, apart from the fact that we translate it slightly differently. Rather than saying what we have done, the pluperfect describes what had happened, what we had done. For example, rather than saying I have danced, the past perfect would be I had danced. Now in terms of forming it, again, a very similar process, but this time we have the imperfect tense of haber rather than the present. This time we have the imperfect tense of haber rather than the present tense. Now the imperfect tense of haber looks like this. Había, habías, había, habíamos, habíais, habían. So we take the correct part of haber in the imperfect and add on the past participle. Now the past participle is formed in the exact same way as we just saw with the perfect tense. So for AR verbs, we take off the AR and add on ado. And for the ER and IR verbs, we take off the ending and add on ido. So for example, comer would become comido. So we take off the ending, the IR, and add on the ido. And that is my past participle. Now because this is Spanish, there are some irregular past participles to learn. So I can't always take off the ending and add on the ado or the ido. For example, take decir, to say, we would expect for it to be decido. However, it actually becomes dicho. For hacer, we would expect it to become hacido, but it doesn't. It becomes hecho. Escribir does not become escribido, but escrito. Abrir becomes abierto. And ver does not become vido, but visto. And finally, poner becomes puesto rather than ponido. So, if I wanted to say we have written, I would take the present tense of haber, which is hemos, and then take the past participle of escribir, which is escrito, to have hemos escrito. And those are all my irregular past participles that we need to know for now. Obviously in Spanish there are more than this, however, for GCSE, these are the key ones to know. Moving on now, we're going to start looking at reflexive verbs. So a reflexive verb is usually used to describe actions which we do to ourselves. Now we can easily identify a reflexive verb in Spanish because they will end in se. For example, we have acostarse, which means to get up, to wake up, Reflexive verbs are used to describe actions that we do to ourselves. Now, these are very easy to describe in Spanish because they all end in se. For example, preocuparse means to worry, literally to worry oneself. Casarse means to get married or to literally marry oneself. Now, to conjugate a reflexive verb, it's very simple and very easy to do. The first step is to remove the se. We then conjugate our verb as normal by removing the AR, ER or IR and then adding our new ending depending on the tense. However, the slight difference is we need a reflexive pronoun in front. Now, each subject pronoun has its equivalent reflexive pronoun. So my yo, we have me, tú, te, él, ella, se, nosotros, nos, vosotros, os, ellos, ellas, se. And these are my reflexive pronouns right here. So if we were going to conjugate the verb casarse, our first step is to take off the se. So we're left with casar. Then I'm going to conjugate my verb, let's say, into the present tense. So I take off the ending and then add on my new ending. So I'm going to say caso, for I get married. However, we now have to find the matching reflexive pronoun. So I've conjugated my verb into the I form, so I have to find the corresponding reflexive pronoun, which is me. So I add me in front, and I'm left with me caso. So the reflexive pronoun is really important when we're conjugating reflexive verbs. And we'll look at the placement of reflexive pronouns a bit later on. Bueno. Moving on, we're going to look at the present continuous tense. The present continuous tense is another tense in Spanish, and it's used to talk about actions which are happening right now. For example, I am speaking, I am writing, I am reading. So the pattern is we have a present tense of estar and the gerund. The gerund is just a fancy grammatical name for the ing part of the verb. For example, reading, sleeping. So the present tense of estar, as we've already seen, is estoy, estás, está, estamos, estáis, and están. That's the present tense of estar. Now, to form the gerund, it's a fairly similar process to the past participle. So we take off the AR verb and we add on ando. For ER and IR verbs, we take off the ending and add on yendo. So recognise that the ER and IR endings are the same. So if I wanted to say I am playing, I would take the I form of estar in the present tense, which is estoy. And jugar is an AR verb, so I take off the AR and add on ando. So we get jugando. I am playing, estoy jugando. Another example, if I wanted to say we are eating, I would take the we form of estar, which is estamos, and eating, comer, is an ER verb, so I take off the ER and add on yendo. So I get estamos comiendo. Bueno. So that's the present continuous tense, talking about what is happening right now. Estoy hablando, estoy enseñando. Comment down below if you can translate those examples. Next up is the imperfect continuous tense. Very similar to the present continuous tense, apart from this time we're talking about what was happening. For example, rather than saying I am speaking, the imperfect continuous version would be I was speaking. Now in this case, we need the imperfect tense of estar rather than the present tense. Now, the present tense of it, this time we need the imperfect tense of estar rather than the present tense. The imperfect tense of estar looks like this. Estaba, estabas, estaba, estábamos, estabais, estaban. And the gerund is formed in the exact same way as in the present continuous. So for my AR verbs, I take off the ending and add on ando. And for my ER and IR verbs, I take off my ending and add on yendo. So using the same examples as we did up here, to say I was playing, I would take the I form of estar in the imperfect. So that's estaba. So we'd have estaba jugando. Because jugar is an AR verb, and we take off the ending and add on ando. Estaba jugando. And that is a quick review of the imperfect continuous. So very similar to the present continuous, except we're saying what was happening rather than what is happening. Moving on now, we're nearly at the end. We're looking at the present subjunctive. Now, the present subjunctive is not required to be able to be used at GCSE, but if you're aiming for the grades 7, 8 or 9, it's a really good way to score some points in the writing exam. So the way we form the present subjunctive is we have to switch the present tense endings around. So for my AR present tense endings, I'm going to give these to my ER and my IR verbs. And then my ER present tense endings, I'm going to give them to my AR verbs. Now, this is all quite confusing, so to practice, we're going to try with bailar. If you want, pause the video now and have a go at conjugating bailar into the present subjunctive down below. So, bailar in the present subjunctive is an AR verb, so I'm going to use the ER present tense endings. So it'll look something like this. Baile, bailes, baile, bailemos, baileis, bailen. So that is bailar in the present subjunctive. We've simply switched around the present tense endings and given my AR verbs, such as bailar, the ER present tense endings. For vender, we're going to do another practice, and again, comment down below the conjugations of vender in the present subjunctive. So, vender will take the AR present tense endings because it's an ER verb. So vender becomes venda, vendas, venda, vendamos, vendais, and vendan. So you'll notice that vender, an ER verb, we now have the AR present tense endings. So as, a, amos, ais, an. And that is a really simple way to form the subjunctive. Of course, there are many irregulars, but at GCSE, you only really need to recognise the regular verbs. Now, knowing when to use it can be quite difficult. However, there's a good acronym that we can use, which is WEIRDO. So weirdo stands for wishes. So if you want someone to do something, for example, quiero que is a good way to start off the subjunctive. So I want. Quiero que bailes conmigo. Quiero que bailes conmigo. I want you to dance with me. Another way we can express a wish is necesito que. I need. For example, necesito que bailes conmigo. I need you to dance with me. The E stands for emotions, and for example, it could be estoy feliz que. estoy feliz que, I'm happy that. So, estoy feliz que bailes conmigo. I'm happy that you dance with me. The I stands for impersonal expressions. Now, at GCSE, don't worry too much about what that means. The R is for recommendations. So, recomiendo que. Recomiendo que, I recommend that. For example, recomiendo que bailes conmigo. I recommend that you dance with me. The D stands for doubt, and we can express the doubt in certain ways. So, for example, no creo que. No creo que. I don't think that. We could say dudo que. I doubt that. No creo que baile conmigo. I don't think he's going to dance with me. And finally, the O stands for ojalá. Ojalá is a fairly difficult word to translate into English, but it's like only if only. Ojalá baile conmigo. If only he would dance with me. Now, what you might have noticed is that all of these phrases end with que, and that is the key signifier of the present subjunctive. The relative clause will always have que in it. Quiero que, recomiendo que, no creo que, estoy feliz que. So if you see que and any of these phrases, they will use the subjunctive. Okay, moving on now to the final part of today's video is the imperfect subjunctive. Now, the imperfect subjunctive has the same uses as the present subjunctive, however this time it's in the past. So rather than saying quiero que bailes conmigo, I would say quería que, and then we'd have the imperfect subjunctive. So forming it is a little bit more work than the present subjunctive, as there are sort of three main steps. We first need the third person plural in the preterite tense. What that really means is the ellos, ellas form. For example, we could have hablaron. So in order to form this tense, you need to know the preterite. Hablaron is my third person plural in the preterite. My second step is to remove the ron, remove the ron. So in our case, we would get rid of the ron, and we'd be left with our stem. Habla. Hablaron, habla. We've taken the ron off. And finally, we have to add our endings. So my endings for the imperfect subjunctive are the same for all three categories of verb, AR, ER, and IR. And they are as follows. Ra, ras, ra, ramos, rais, ran. So if we're going to do that same process for my verb hablar, I have habla and then add ra. So hablara, hablaras, hablara, habláramos, hablarais, hablaran. Something to note with the we form is we add on the ending, and then the accent will need to be going on the vowel that precedes the ending. So habláramos in this instance. So that's it. And again, at GCSE, you don't need to know really how to use it, but if you can have some good set phrases, that would be nice. So we can have si, so that's if, plus the imperfect subjunctive, plus the conditional. So for example, si pudiera, and then we'd have the conditional. So that means if I could, plus the conditional. We could also have something like si tuviera. Si tuviera meaning if I had. Si fuera is if I were, so if I were tall, if I were the president. And we can use all of these phrases in combination with the conditional to make up a si clause. Now these are really good grade 9 phrases that you can put into your writing, and you don't have to properly learn how to form the imperfect subjunctive. So if you're aiming for grade 7, 8 or 9, I would really recommend learning some of these C clauses and learning how to use them in your writing, because these are applicable to pretty much every topic. Bueno, that is it for this video. We've been through a lot of grammar, but I hope it was useful. If you want to download a filled-in copy of this or a blank copy, you can do that by just going to the A-Star Spanish website. Bueno, gracias for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Adios.